It's so hello. I think everything should be live now. If not, I've got no way of knowing. So I hope everyone's doing okay, and yeah, welcome to one of these live streams. It feels like it's been a while since I've done it. I've been a bit of a busy schedule for the last couple of months, weeks, with like retreats and stuff. And one of the main things we're going to talk about tonight is this conference that I've been attended. But anyway, just as a quick sort of bit of setup, if it looks like my mouth moving, hopefully everyone can hear me. Hopefully these hand gestures will indicate if you can't hear me, let me know. Actually, let me just check on the Discord. Can somebody just post in the chat if everything sounds okay? Just in general? Or anywhere? I'll assume it is. Okay. So, cool. Cheers. Thanks a lot. Mega Man USA. Cool. Cheers, guys. And good to see you all. So, a couple of little bits of housekeeping before I sort of get going. First of all, doing the usual kind of like Discord calling thing. So if any of you guys want to have a chat about any of the stuff that we're talking about tonight, or just about anything in general to do with psychedelics, you can do so by joining the Discord server. We've got a channel there called Livestream Calling. Click into that. There's a functionality where you can raise your hand, which will then let me know that you want to talk, and we'll bring you up, and you can talk as part of the stream. We can have a good old chat about some stuffs. What else do I want to talk about? I just wanted to mention that as part of this live stream, I don't know if you guys have seen my recent video regarding the Easy Mesh. No, hold on, let me get this right. The eMesh Easy Loader, which is this little plastic widget that I've been working on for actually a couple of months now. It's surprising how long it takes to get the design for one of these things right. I went through a lot of prototypes. In fact, I think I've got a lot of the prototypes up here. So lots of little tweaks as to regarding the exact dimensions and the shape of the hole and what sort of what goes right. But if you haven't seen it, go and check out that latest video. For anyone who uses an eMesh, basically this is a sort of device that I made in order to make those vapes easier to reload. Because if you've been following what I've say about that eMesh vape, it is my favorite kind of vape for using with DMT. But it is a bit of a ball ache to reload. It's very sort of clunky and cumbersome, very easy to spill all your DMT. So I kind of made this as a way of being able to sort of reload it a bit more efficiently without it spilling all over the place. And yeah, I've got a few of these. I've just dropped on the floor. Oops. So I've got a few of these to give away. And so basically, if you want one, then all you need to do, first of all, if you want one, then you can actually buy one, which supports the channel. So there are the links to the storefront for buying one are in the previous video description. But I thought I'd give away a couple. So if any of you guys want to have one of these for free, all you need to do is paste in the comments. So not the chat, not the live chat, but in the comments of this video. And I believe the comments only go live after the stream is finished. So once the stream is finished, go into the comment section and just paste something like "I want one." And what I'll do is I'll give it like a day or two for people to paste in there, to put in there if they want one or not. And then I will pick one at random and I'll announce probably on Discord or something who's got one. And then what else would I need? I'd also, let me think of it. I will announce on... How will I do this? Because I'll need people's email addresses, but I don't want them to have to paste their email address in. I'll tell you what. I don't know why I'm getting so confused with this. I've done it before. So if you want one, paste a comment, and then I'll reply to that comment, and then you can email me with my email address. I'll put that in the reply, and then I will send one of these out to you for free. And I think I'm going to give away 2 of them. Only reason being, it's not that the thing itself costs a huge amount to put together, but the postage can get like quite expensive, especially if sending it to the US or something like that. Okay, so that's all that stuff. The main thing I wanted to talk about and use as kind of a theme for this live stream was this conference that I recently attended. So let me just bring up a bit of a slideshow. So recently, Rachel and I attended this Alps psychedelic conference in Switzerland. And Alps stands for Awareness Lectures in Psychedelic Science. So ALPS, Alps. And yeah, so you're in Switzerland, so that's kind of a cool little gimmick. And you can see some pictures, hopefully, going through the stream now, showing some of the speakers, showing myself and Rachel, some of our friends who were there. And I'll just turn that off for the moment. So yeah, just first of all, a couple of things about this conference. It was really good. We had myself and Rachel really enjoyed being at this conference. We learned a lot. It was a 3-day conference. We were only there for 2 days of it. But yeah, this was last weekend. So it ran from Friday through to the Sunday. Loads of speakers, loads of different sort of topics, but all based around psychedelics. And it was much more leaning towards the scientific side of things. So this was like what kind of clinical trials are happening, what sort of research studies are going on, how psychedelics like react with their biology. So much more coming from that kind of, let's say, that kind of like Rick Doblin, Rick Strassman, that kind of scientist view. There was some stuff in there that was a little bit more out there, which I enjoyed. But yeah, I just want to sort of give some of my feedback on that conference. Also, it sets up some of the speakers that are going to be appearing in future episodes on the channel, because there's a lot of networking and stuff going on there. So I got talking to a couple of guys who I found I think these guys had the most fascinating talks, or at least the ones that resonated with me most. So I went up to them afterwards, arranged to get them on here, and I was really pleasantly surprised. One of them actually knew who I was, and I'd watched the show, so I was like, it's a really amazing compliment to know when that somebody actually watches this stuff, particularly when there's somebody in these sort of academic fields. So that's some really good guests lined up, and I just want to talk around. I'm going to give like a very brief overview of my thoughts around what was going on with this conference. Bit of a disclaimer up front. Some of what I say could be interpreted as me being sort of like negative and like sort of down on this conference. That's not my intention at all. As you know, I like to be very blunt and very kind of like open-minded, very clear about how I'm interpreting things. So some of the stuff that I saw with this conference, I absolutely disagreed with, and I was like, or at least some of it I found sort of concerning, or like I was like, how does this affect like the everyday person like me? But I don't want that to be interpreted as like me being down on this conference or down on these speakers. I think the more sort of voices within the discourse, the better. And I think the best way that we can sort of work out the trajectory of this whole psychedelic renaissance thing is to have different opinions and sort of work things out. So I'm not I'm just kind of literally just voicing this out as what my feelings are on the topic, not saying that I'm sort of like right, or that this thing shouldn't happen, or that this person was an idiot or anything like that. I just want to be absolutely clear. I thought the conference was great. I thought all the speakers were really great. Some of them just had very different opinions to myself, which is absolutely fine. That's all part of the bigger discourse. So we've got this conference guide at the beginning, and I was like scribbling notes all the way through it. So I'm just going to go through a couple of the sort of my thoughts around some of first of all, what these talks were and some of my thoughts around them. And then after that, we'll get into the callers and we'll sort of see if anybody else wants to comment on it or just have a chat about psychedelics in general. So the first one was this lady called Helena. Right, okay, so most of these had, these are people with like European names. I'm probably going to pronounce the names incorrectly because I'm English and we do that. But it looks like it's like Helena Acher. Hope I pronounced that right, Helena. She was talking a lot around basically ayahuasca and its analogs. So it's when we're talking about ayahuasca analogs, we're talking about what's kind of typically referred to as like farmahuasca. So basically recreating the ayahuasca effect of an MUI and then taking DMT, but doing it kind of in a more kind of clinical setting without all the sort of necessarily all the traditional sort of singing and all that stuff, and also one of the things they try to do within these settings is reduce a lot of this body load, this kind of infamous ayahuasca purging and stuff like that. And so it was kind of interesting to hear that, first of all, to bring something like ayahuasca, which I think is so nested in this traditional framework, and then bring it into a Western setting. Now, this is something that's going to be talked about a lot. In fact, I've talked about it myself on this channel, like how, and I've even talked about this with South American shamans who agree that something like ayahuasca, if it is to do any good, on a worldwide scale, it cannot just stay in South America. There's got to be some kind of mechanism by which it can spread across the entire globe, and that necessarily can't be. Basically, there needs to be some kind of development of psychedelic culture within the West, and this is kind of the question of this talk. What would that look like? And there was a phrase that they used there which I really liked, and it was basically that the phrase was psycho-spiritual integration. Now that might sound like a bit of a waffle sort of word salad thing, but basically what the way this phrase was being used was that. And again, I've talked about this a lot on the channel. Within the West, we don't really have any kind of spiritual, or you could say like psychological practice that really involves psychedelics beyond these kind of fairly niche clinical settings. Now, the difference there being in that within somewhere like South America, this is just kind of like baked into the culture. So you have these psychedelic churches. You have like in Central America, in Mexico, you have things like peyote churches. You have things like in South America, you've got these ayahuasca churches. Santo Daime, just ayahuasca, tribes in the jungle doing stuff. So it's kind of the psychedelic culture is more or less like available to anyone. Here in the West, it's really only available on two levels. You do it on your own illegally, in which case there isn't really a, like I said, this psycho-spiritual culture around it. You might have your own sort of psycho-spiritual practice which you brought in, which is something similar to kind of like what I do. But it's not woven into the culture. And then you've got the second level of this, which is where things are happening in the not in the traditional, in the clinical setting, where there's almost zero kind of spiritual culture. It's in a very dry clinical setting, and typically, so you're on a bed, you're in like a kind of a very soft room, it's like whale music playing and shit like that, and the kind of the question sort of being raised is like how do we develop our own psychedelic culture? Because although these clinical trials are all fine and well, this isn't going to scale particularly well. We can't, it's not going to be workable for your everyday man to go to a clinic or a hospital and check in for 24 hours and have a doctor and a nurse sat there and, an eye mask on and spend all night. That's just not really workable in the way that it's workable, say in Peru, to get 30 people in a maloca, in a jungle temple, and sort of have like one shaman or two shamans sort of administer to them all. So we're going to have to develop some kind of culture around that. And I just thought that was kind of really interesting. It really put the question back to someone like myself, who is very interested in this kind of community aspect of when we talk about the psychedelic community, what do I mean? How do we develop this? How do we make this into something more than just us saying, "Oh yes, we're the psychedelic community"? How do we build this kind of framework into our cultures, into our community, so that it's not some kind of like weird fringe thing, and people do feel supported as they go through these processes. So there's a lot there. There was some talk around like what would we even call this if we brought in like an ayahuasca analog into the West? Do we still call it ayahuasca? Do we call it pharmahuasca? Why do we even call it anything ayahuasca? Like, why are we importing this kind of importing this kind of name structure? I'm not a big one on these kind of arguments, but it certainly does raise kind of questions about like are we like, is this cultural appropriation? Are we trying to bring something in? Why don't we just call it something different instead of something ayahuasca? So yeah, it was that was a very sort of interesting talk. They talked around that they'd done a lot of clinical trials on this already. They'd had really good results for not only stuff like depression, which is sort of very commonly known, that ayahuasca seems to have a very good effect on people with depression, but also other kind of disorders. And one that was particularly of interest to myself and Rachel was that there was some evidence that it was showing potential for healing eating disorders. So yeah, that was a fascinating talk from Helen Eicher. Next, we had a talk from a guy called Matthias Liegti, who is a professor in clinical pharmacology from University Hospital Basel, and he's like one of the sort of main researcher guys here in Switzerland. Again, it was a very in-depth, very dense talk, a lot of information in there. But one of the super interesting things in this particular talk was he really highlighted how much dosages or the perception of dosages, whether it's what we're taking on the kind of the street or what's even been taken within a lab. The idea of, this much dose equals this much experience is extremely sketchy. And the reason being for that is that what they discovered is that when they were doing these trials, that with the trials that they were doing and the amounts of that they were doing, I think they were given, let me try and get my notes here. Can't remember. I think it was like something like 200 micrograms of LSD. And if you have 200 micrograms of pure like clinical grade LSD, that would be a heavy dose, like ego death style doses. Now, I think most of us on the street, we get sold things like LSD, and we get it in tabs. It might be 100 mics or 150, and I think so we would take like one or maybe two of these, and we would sort of have an expectation of what that experience would be like, and it wouldn't necessarily be like the heaviest experience in the world, total ego death thing. And so what is kind of like the message was, most of the stuff that you get on the street is dosed incredibly imprecisely. You really can't take for a second as gospel what these things are sold as. But more importantly, even when they test it, even when they're in the lab, when they get it sort of pure, these things are so volatile and degrade so quickly that you could have what you think was like sort of 200 sort of mics of LSD, and just by reacting with the sunlight in a very short space of time, it could like degrade very quickly. So it was really stressing how hard it is to precisely measure out these dosages. And I think this kind of really goes into play, like for us on the street who we think we know what we're getting, and we buy stuff from some place and we trust that it's, oh well, they said it's 150, so it must be 150. It really is a lucky dip. If the people in the labs are having trouble measuring the accuracy of things, you can guarantee the people on the street have got no chance doing it. So that was very interesting. Another one, which was another part of what was interesting when they were doing the clinical trial, and I think this was a study with psilocybin, and they were talking around, and this was kind of like debunking one of the, I would say, myths around people who have depression and the medication that they take for depression, and then how that would interact with some of these psychedelics. Now, I want to be clear here, I'm not talking about MAOIs. MAOIs are definitely a different sort of category, so ayahuasca is a different sort of subject there. But we know that when, with things like ayahuasca, there's this kind of like notorious like ayahuasca diet. You have to stop taking all these medications because it can react with the MAOI factor, and that's completely correct. So I think that's a very sensible thing. But I think that kind of cultural, that sort of that sort of nugget seems to have like embedded itself in the psychedelic community, and I've certainly seen people recommending that even if you're going to do mushrooms or going to do LSD, that you should stop taking all medications, and that and there's a kind of a collision here, because on the one hand you've got people who have conditions like depression, like very treatment resistant depression, and they might be on like antidepressants for all these things, and then on and we're kind of or the culture, is sort of advocating that, yeah, psychedelics are really good at treating depression. But then we're sort of saying, oh, but you've got to stop taking all your medications and you've got to stop doing this before you can even attempt it. And what this guy said, this scientist, Matthias Lecter, was saying, no, he would actually recommend that for people who are looking to do psychedelics, if you have depression, don't stop taking your antidepressants. He actually found that would have a negative effect on the psychedelic because it would increase your anxiety. So it would give you a greater chance of having a bad trip and sort of making the outcome that you're trying to get to, the sort of the overcoming of this depression, make that actually harder to achieve. So that was a kind of an interesting thing. And again, just to be clear, that doesn't necessarily apply to something where you're taking MAOIs. But for psilocybin and LSD, you were saying that, yeah, but if you're on antidepressant medications, it's better to keep taking them. Very interesting thing. Again, it's kind of debunking some of these kind of myths that have crept into the psychedelic sort of discourse. Was there anything else in this one? Yeah, one really interesting bit about this, when they do these clinical trials, a lot of one of the main things they do is double blind tests. So some people are given a placebo, and they're saying that with psychedelics, it's very sort of common that within a sort of an hour, the people who've had the placebo usually realize that they've had the placebo, and sometimes there can be a little bit of disappointment and stuff like that. But they had one person within this trial who was on the placebo, but absolutely started manifesting the psychedelic effects and was completely convinced that they were on the psychedelic drug and were reporting having the full experience. So that's just, absolutely fascinating how powerful this placebo effect is, which, it's nothing new. I think a lot of people have talked about it, but to hear that someone can sort of convince themselves, or perhaps not convince themselves, perhaps, they really truly believed that this was psychedelic. Yeah, interesting stuff. And then I'll just check where we're up to in terms of people looking to. Oops. Okay. So I'll just waffle on a little bit more about this because, again, I just want to get some of this stuff out there because I find it super interesting, and then we'll get to the sort of questions and if anyone wants to do the call and stuff. So the next guy is someone who's actually going to be appearing as a guest on the show. His name is Sam Gandhi, and he is a PhD ecologist, researcher, consultant. He worked previously with the Beckley Foundation. So yeah, very well known sort of like Psychedelic Institute. And Sam was a really, really interesting guy. And his basically the theme of his talk was around basically integrating with nature. So psychedelics I think the phrase used was a catalyst to connect with nature. Now, again, this is one of the things we kind of, it's not particularly news. It's not anything sort of like new to know that psychedelics sort of have this effect of feeling sort of more connected to nature. Start feeling like I'm one with the plants, I'm one with the trees and all this kind of thing. But what a lot of Sam's research was just how actually beneficial these experiences can be if you do them out in nature. And also there was a counterpoint to that, and this is one of the kind of the bits where again you'll start seeing my sort of disagreement with the kind of some of the what's going on in the clinical setting. If you, as you kind of know, like you take psychedelics and you just become incredibly open, like emotionally open, psychologically open, and so then when you're out in nature, then you start feeling this feeling of unity and oneness and sort of oceanic boundlessness and connected to the nature. This feeling like you're part of nature, part of the universe. So that again, that's no real sort of surprise to someone, and I think it's one of the reasons why something like ayahuasca, when done in the traditional setting, is so powerful, because you're just completely immersed within it. Now, a lot of what's being done in the West is about how to move these psychedelic experiences into a clinical setting. So again, it's done within a sort of a concrete room, a very nice concrete room, but a concrete room nonetheless. Might be a sort of therapist's room, hospital room. And the kind of one of the points that Sam was raising, which I thought was, a really great point, was that if, you get this feeling of unity and connectedness from being out in nature and being psychologically emotional in that way, what are we doing to ourselves if we do this within these clinical settings? We are kind of normalizing this feeling, rather than normalizing the kind of like the expanse and the connectedness of being in the natural world, we're kind of normalizing to ourselves this kind of being in a safe space, being in a, walling ourselves off in a concrete room, having sort of doctors and nurses nearby that we need to be sort of, as though there's something wrong with us. This hadn't occurred to me at all. And I just thought, what a great point is that, if we're opening up our soul, then what are we putting in there? Like, what are we saying? Like, oh, that this is, what are we even advertising to like future generations? Like, as though like, because there is an aspect of when these clinical trials and stuff are happening, clinical trials with a view to opening clinics. We hear a lot about psychedelic clinics opening up, which is not a bad thing in my opinion. I think it's good that these places exist. But if that becomes the norm, that, clinics in the same way that you'd have some sort of clinic as like for something else that was wrong with you, and these things are just like, again, these are not group bonding experiences. These are in your own safe space, sort of lighting controlled, mask on, sort of, what are we implanting within ourselves? What are we implanting within the culture about what psychedelics are? Is this the message that we're sort of going to pass on through to our children, that psychedelics should be taken in a room on your own with a doctor nearby? It freaked me out a bit, to be honest, because I was thinking, this is almost like the opposite of what I think this psychedelic experience should be. And it kind of, and on the one hand, I'm really grateful that these researchers are doing this, first of all, just doing this research. And I know there needs to be a mechanism by which we get it in there through and make these things legal and make them normal within the sort of the culture. But I was really worried that, this just becomes the kind of, the norm. And it was one sort of interesting thing that kind of like popped up around this was like we talk around substances being kind of meshed into the culture. And one way that this happens, which is something that we kind of probably all familiar with, and I think I've maybe taken it for granted a little bit, is the pub, the English pub, or the bar or the whatever, wherever you live. Here we have a place within the culture for people to go and let go and communicate with each other. Be part. You walk into a bar and walk into a pub, and you instantly just become part of that space, which allows a certain things. It allows certain. You don't have to act in the way that you would out in the street. And I think this is actually, it sounds bizarre to think of like psychedelic pubs, but I actually think this is maybe something we need to get more towards. Like, not necessarily in the pub sort of way where you go and get shit-faced or play on the fruit machines or whatever, but you can understand the sort of the difference between an environment like, I mean, just to imagine if all your drinking, if all your alcohol consumption had to be done in a safe space, in a hospital, where you went into a concrete room and a doctor sat next to you and you put on an eye mask and listened to whale song and drank a pint of beer. How weird that would be, how just detached it would be from the social lubricant that alcohol is. And so why is that a good thing for psychedelics? I always think it's like the worst thing for psychedelics. I think we need to get to a place where there is some kind of psychedelic pub, whatever that looks like. I've no idea. I've certainly having discussions about it on my Discord, and so we've, there's some great conversations there. I just want to give a shout out to one of my friends on there, Sheldon, who's been sort of working with me to like bounce some ideas backwards and forwards about what could this look like. I think it's a challenge that we're going to have to really get our heads around for the future of these things. I think something. This is kind of why I like ayahuasca retreats. I think they kind of nail this kind of setting, this group setting. You all come, you come together for this kind of, this purpose. But again, ayahuasca retreats are expensive. A lot of them are in South America. We've got to, in Europe, in the West, in America, we've got to come up with our own way of doing this. And I don't think it's going to, I don't think just a pure clinical route is the correct route. I just want to give a shout out there to Serpent Power. I saw you give a super chat, mate. So thank you so much for that. And I certainly will keep it up, mate. Thank you very much. So that was Sam Gandhi. And I say, if you like the sound of this topic, look out for my upcoming interview with Sam. I'm really looking forward to talking to him. We had a good chat after he did his talk, and we were really getting into this. Really brainstorming. Like, what could this look like? What could this kind of nature integrated psychedelic community? And I think nature integrated sounds a bit like tree huggy sort of thing, but given what I'm talking about, like this contrast between the clinical setting and our normal lives, there's got to be something in there. And so, really looking forward to talking to Sam. Let me just see. What's the other ones I want to talk about? I'll talk about. There's two more I'll talk about before we get to the sort of the questions stuff. One, I talked to. There was a guy who gave a talk. So this was someone from the UK, a guy called Dr. Ben Sessa, who is, let me get his credentials right. He was a medical doctor for the UCL, does research projects for Bristol University, Cardiff University, Imperial College London, and he's the head of psychedelic medicine at Awaken Life Sciences. And he basically runs a few of these clinics throughout Europe, working with ketamine, MDMA, and psilocybin. I think he was from Bristol. And Ben was a very, very interesting guy, very dynamic. He was sort of really owned the room, really liked talking to him. And again, he's agreed to be a guest on the show. So, what Ben was talking about, let me grab my notes here. He was basically talking about how kind of I think he's let me rewind. So I think his main angle was regarding that a lot of the problems that we're kind of facing as a society is related to sort of trauma and childhood trauma. I think in this realm he's sort of very much on the same page as Gabor Mate, if any of you've seen any of his stuff. So basically saying that when we talk about dealing with the trauma that we might have as adults, really what we tend to be dealing with is something that happened as a child. And he believes that a lot of this can be sort of tapped into through psychedelic therapy. And he's got these kind of clinics all over the UK. This was a kind of like an interesting juxtaposition because they're using these terms. Ben used these terms of like that we are in a medical health crisis, and I think this is not particularly controversial. There seems to be cases of depression and sort of suicide and sort of dysmorphia, eating disorders, all these kind of things just exploding all over the place. And so we need to kind of as a society work out what's going on there. But again, there was a kind of a question here of scale. If we are talking about a mental health crisis, as in millions and millions of people, then how are we going to sort of deal with them? And again, is how can we scale what happens in the clinical setting? What the main substance that Ben was kind of an advocate for was MDMA, and he talked a lot about some of the results he's had from working with MDMA and how that for dealing with a lot of these kind of crisis, these kind of trauma things, that I think he described MDMA as the perfect drug. But he also, one of the really interesting things was how he differentiated sort of MDMA used within a clinical setting to what's kind of referred to on the street as ecstasy. And a lot of the kind of some of the stuff which he would disagree with about MDMA being toxic, or sort of neurotoxic, and he says he doesn't think that's the case at all. And so the kind of the question there that came up was why do you feel so shitty after taking ecstasy? You take ecstasy on a Friday night on sort of Saturday you might feel okay. Sunday you start feeling a little bit kind of, crappy. Monday you just feel absolutely awful. Tuesday, kind of, there's a phrase that we had in the UK of like suicide Tuesdays, because it was just you just felt so bad, so depleted. So yeah, what gives? If MDMA is such like a perfect drug in terms of using it within a clinical setting, what's the difference? And the way he spelled it out, it was kind of obvious, to be honest, saying, MDMA used within a clinical setting, given a very accurate dosages, is pretty much fine, and you won't really feel much of a sort of come down to it at all. But if you go out dancing all night, staying up all night, drinking you drink like 5 pints, you go out to a nightclub, you take some random pills that someone's told you is ecstasy. You don't know what the dosage is, so you take some ecstasy. You stay out another like 5 hours. You dehydrate yourself to fuck. You go to bed dehydrated. You might smoke a few joints. You might take a bit of speed or something else. By the time you get to bed, you're just an absolute physical wreck. And so yeah, when you wake up on Saturday night, Sunday morning, yeah, you are fucked, and you're not fucked just purely because of the ecstasy, although that's like a part of it. You're fucked because you've just ran your body through the sort of through this like narcotics endurance contest and dance your tits off. So he was, and I would I was one of those kids who absolutely abused ecstasy and was doing that, staying out all night, and I used to have the worst come downs. So yeah, I was kind of very interested to hear, and also very thankful to hear that the substance itself doesn't appear to be neurotoxic, and that if sort of used correctly, it can be this sort of like hugely beneficial substance. So yeah, I was really looking forward to talking to Ben, and again he'll be coming up as a guest. One last thing I was talking about just before I'm going to get into the questions is there was a guy called, and again I'm going to mispronounce this guy's name, he's called Ansgar Rougemont. He was a MD, psychiatrist, psychotherapist, and book author, originally from Germany but living in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. I'm not going to go into super what Ansgar talked about, but I just want to say shout out to Shantifier for that super chat. Thanks a lot, Shantifier. You're a gem, mate. So, Ansgar, and certainly this was one of the things when he said it within the talk, like you could feel the audience become super uncomfortable. And he was talking about and this wasn't the crux. We're saying this was just one piece within his talk. I think I'm probably going to have to do some videos going into these things in far more detail, because I realise I'm just trying to get through it all quickly so I can get to the kind of like sort of questions and talk to people. But this really sort of struck home for like, wow, humans are weird and fucked up. They were talking about basically what trauma is, and it is a field. The phrase that he used to describe it was, when you are traumatized, it is the feeling of learned helplessness. So the feeling of when somebody knows they are helpless. There's no fight. There's no way of fighting out of this. There's no reasoning out of this. You are helpless. I don't know if you've ever been in that kind of situation as a child, and unfortunately I have. But that I could very much relate to that feeling of I am helpless. Like there is nothing I can do here apart from receive what is about to happen. You see this kind of a lot in people who are like victims of abuse, where you get this kind of people say, why don't you run away, or why don't you hit them back, or why don't you do this, why don't you do this, or why don't you do that? And yeah, you can't. You are helpless. You have learned that you are helpless. There is nothing you can do in this situation. You just take it, because that is all you can do. And what a sort of Ansgar, I keep saying Ansgar, but I'll say his name's Ansgar. What he was talking about was that they actually did a kind of a form of animal testing to work this out, to establish this theory, and it was brutal. So listening to what they did to some animals, and the animals they did it to were dogs. So what they did is they put dogs in a cage which had like sort of 2 floor sections and a little barrier in between, a little barrier that the dog could hop over. And so you've got these 2 floor sections and a barrier, and the dog's in one of these sections. and they started applying electric shocks through the floor. So the dog started getting electric shocks. So the dog realized it could escape the electric shock by jumping over the barrier into the second part of the cage, and then there weren't any electric shocks. And then they started putting electric shocks in that part of the floor too. So the dog's now in pain, and it starts like jumping over the barrier, but wherever it goes, it's receiving these electric shocks, so it's suffering. And basically, after a certain amount of time, you just break the dog's spirit. It realizes that at first it freaks out, it's jumping backwards and forwards over this barrier, trying to get away from this source of discomfort. And then after a while, it just breaks. You've just broken the dog, and it's kind of like it's now literally traumatized, and it now cannot trust that anywhere it goes, it will not be electrocuted. So now you've got this animal that's now cowering in the corner. It cannot even trust the floor that it stood on. And this was, just, and I think the thing that stuck out to me here was like, there seems something really, I mean, first of all, it kind of, yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of sort of animal testing at all. I think it's one of those things that we as kind of human beings, we kind of stick our heads in the sand about how kind of cruel these things are. But to hear, and I think there's one thing where I think we kind of understand a bit, like, say like a drug being tested on an animal, or even like, even certain cosmetics being tested on an animal. That's something I can get our head around. But the idea of deliberately messing with the consciousness of another living system, with the aim being to traumatize it, to see if you can, it's fucking horrific. It was such a grotesque thing to hear. And I want to be clear, this wasn't Ansgar doing this study. He was talking about a study that someone else had done. So yeah, this wasn't this guy. This wasn't his study. Don't want any negativity directed towards him. He was just talking about what someone else did, and he himself was not to like pro this study at all, but he was just saying this is the thing that happened, so we now understand the mechanism of it. But yeah, it was it kind of really drove home, like, fuck me, like, us humans, we can be really fucking messed up. Anyway, I can see I see someone's posted in the chat that they don't want me to talk about that sort of experience. So apologies, I didn't mean to upset anybody by talking about some of this stuff. So maybe I should put up some sort of trigger warning or some sort of alert in there. So yeah, apologies if anyone's upset by the dog story. Okie dokie, let's see if anybody wants to have... there were actually more talks here, but I think I might have waffled on a bit too much, and I'll come back to some if we've got time later on. But yeah, let's see if anyone... I'll just pop over to Discord and see if anybody wants to have a chat about stuff. So, I can see your mate Remmer has got his hand up, so let me... I invite you to speak, Rama. So you should have an invitation thing there.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can, mate. How you doing?
Good, and you?
Yeah, mate, I'm sound. So, what's on your mind, dude?
My question was, we often hear that the 2020s will be like the decade of psychedelic renaissance, like when it comes to democratization of psychedelics. So after going to this conference, would you say that there is still truth to this, or did you get the impression that it's going strong or it's already dying down? Like, what would you say is the current status of this alleged renaissance?
Yeah. So, my take on it is, I think the psychedelic renaissance is running strong. I think I would almost say it's like unstoppable at this point. And what I would use to sort of justify that is, first of all, that things like this conference are happening. So it's not just the conference itself that's happening, but the conference was full of all these people doing all these kind of trials on psychedelics. There's so much research going on. I was one of the only non-academic people in there. This whole conference was just packed full of students and researchers and therapists and stuff. So from that perspective, from this clinical perspective, from psychedelics being able to be used in the studies, It's just on, at least within sort of Switzerland. It certainly seems to be going on in the UK, and the UK is very conservative around these things. We see in the States that there's a lot of like places where psychedelics have been decriminalized and legalized. All these studies seem to show, that we can't ignore them anymore as tools for solving things like PTSD and depression. One of the surprising things I heard within this conference was how much the military, the US military, is on board with these psychedelics because they don't want traumatized soldiers. That's not a good outcome for the military to have, its soldiers dropping out. So even when you've got the, like the military, which is considered like, this like very old school conservative sort of organizations, even when they're embracing psychedelics, I think it's just obvious something's, the tide has changed. And I think we'll see, certainly I think as we get further into the 2020s, give it 5 years and you'll have a lot of the results from these clinical trials. They'll be published. They'll be now then looking at ways to sort of incorporate it into a therapeutic model. So I think you're going to start seeing stuff like what, here in Switzerland, you have like clinics that can offer like, ketamine therapy. I think we'll start seeing like sort of MDMA therapy offered as like a norm. And then I think we'll, possibly moving into things like, psilocybin therapy. I think these things first will dissipate out that way through this kind of clinical model. And then, like I say, like I talked about earlier, then it's up to us to work out how we can sort of bake this more into the culture. So yeah, man, I think it's totally happening. I think it's unstoppable at this point.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries, mate. Let's see if anybody else wants to have a chat. Not yet. So let's have a look to the text questions. I saw a few had come in. I saw someone else is asking about this dog thing. I feel like I've maybe upset people with this dog situation. Nobody, that was the username, asked what happened to the dogs. They still jumping even when let out. I think the honest truth, mate, with these situations is that when you have a clinical trial an animal based study, the animals are usually destroyed after it. So yeah, when you have like these kind of you hear these kind of like horror experiments, like monkeys being given cigarettes, or sort of like rats being force fed lipstick, or whatever to try and work out where the toxic effects are. Yeah, those animals get destroyed after those things. They don't sort of get passed to a home for somebody to look after. I would imagine it would be the same thing for these dogs that were kind of electrocuted at once. And to be honest, that might actually be the best thing for them. I mean, like, yeah, you've got some animal that's just been. I mean, what does that even look like to be an animal that gets put in a cage and then deliberately traumatized? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe the best outcome for that is to be put down. So that's. I'm saying that's what I believe happens. I'm not saying I know that for a fact, but yeah, it's grim, mate. It's grim. Okay, let's see. So Kian asks, if you don't mind me prying, how often do you trip and on what substances? Yeah, mate. I'd probably not as much as what people think I do, although probably more than the average person. So it varies a lot for me, and it varies based upon my schedule. Because if I'm doing something like, say, like an ayahuasca retreat, then one of the sort of preconditions of these retreats is that you have like a free period before, where you don't do any substances, where you try and sort of get your diet in order and stuff like that. And I've actually had quite a few of these retreats this year. I was away in June. I was away in, I can't remember. I've been to like 3 retreats over the summer. I've had a couple of LSD trips this year. I've had like mescaline trips. I had two mescaline San Pedro trips. I did 8 ayahuasca ceremonies in Peru. I did I've done a couple of bits of DMT here and there. I've done a couple. I don't know if I mentioned a few times with LSD. So I don't really do it like it's not like I do things super regular. It's not like every month or every couple of weeks I do something. For me, it tends to come in like bursts of activity, and then particularly if one of these activities has a lot to it, then I usually have some sort of time off. So like after, say, you know, I did these 8 ayahuasca ceremonies, so that was 8 ayahuasca ceremonies in 2 weeks. After that, yeah, you want a bit of time off. This ties into this whole, you know, thing I talk around with integration. So when you have like a, you know, a very heavy or a sort of a series of psychedelic events, I tend to take a bit of downtime. But yeah, you know, I would say if I was going to average it out, it's, you know, and again, this isn't actually how it happens, but if I just took the amount of times I tripped over a year and averaged it out, it would probably be something like 1.5 times a month, something like that. So yeah, hope that answers your question. So Rema asks, do we have more entries to win the load if we're in Switzerland? No, mate. Swiss posting stuff is expensive. Even posting stuff to Switzerland is expensive. This country is goddamn expensive. So yeah, I think I'll stick with giving 2 of them away for the moment, but I might give more away in future live streams. Let's have a look. So Janet Jacks mentions Scandinavian music such as Heilung, which is somehow dreaming back into our collective imagination a ritualistic and sacred archetypal imprint that is helping us remember. That's an excellent point, Janet. And the reason I zeroed in on that comic, guess where I'm going on Tuesday night? So this Tuesday, I'm going watching Heilung. So they're here in Switzerland. And yeah, I'm going, so Tuesday night, going to a concert, watching Heilung. Really looking forward to it. For anyone who's never seen them, Heilung are like a sort of tribally, sort of Scandinavian-y, Viking-y, Norse-y, I don't know how you describe it, but sort of very like European tribal music sort of stuff. Really cool. Just go on YouTube, look at some of the stuff. I really enjoy the stuff. So I'm watching that, and then I'm actually heading over to the UK. I've got to do some work over there, so I've got a busy week. Let's have a look. Just check. So I see Sheldon's actually popping up. So Sheldon's one of the guys I've been talking to on my Discord around sort of like, yeah, what could this look like this when we talk around this, a psychedelic culture, getting it into the mainstream. So I think let me just find Sheldon's comments. Talk about a model sort of being used in Oregon. So yeah, I think he's talking about like what this kind of like psychedelic practice could look like. So yeah, I think if I think Oregon is it does seem to be a bit of a fairly unique situation, or sort of not necessarily the norm. I believe it's like a lot more kind of like hippie sort of out there. So yeah, I've certainly heard of psychedelic groups sort of meeting and congregating and doing things together out there. Really, when I'm talking about a lot of this Western stuff, I'm talking about kind of Europe, because that's where I'm from. You don't really get sort of groups like that, at least not as sort of publicly as they seem to be, out in the US. I believe in like Oregon, it's now a sort of state where you can, it's like fairly well tolerated, these kind of groups. But yeah, we need to sort of, I would say maybe get something like that in Europe. So yeah, it's be interesting to sort of ponder what that looks like. But I think that the main thing is it's about building a face-to-face psychedelic community, and I think there's a couple of examples we've got to work where stuff like this already exists. So I'm sure most of you guys will have heard of the artist Alex Gray, and Alex Gray has this organization called Entheon. I'm never sure whether it's called Entheon or Chapel of Sacred Mirrors, but one of those two anyway. And they have this group, so it's based around like sort of like art and psychedelic art. But you have a meeting spot, which is like Alex Gray's house, or this kind of like this Entheon church that he's building, which I think is somewhere in like upper state New York or something like that. And so you have a place to congregate and practice being just sort of like be, a community maybe take psychedelics together or whatever. But it's not sort of like necessarily there's a hierarchy to it, but it gives, like a meeting point, a place where you can go and be part of something. And this is one of the things where like mainstream religion really has it right. Like that's what a church is. A church is a place where you can go and congregate and do sort of spiritual practice. But I think most of us, that particular spiritual practice doesn't resonate like Christianity or Islam or whatever. So yeah, we need something like that, but for psychedelics, and it can't just be retreats, because like I said, retreats are expensive. So it can't be something whereby you've got to pay thousands to go every time. We need something like this sort of religious church model where you can just go to it. You can just go there on a Sunday and be part of some sort of community. So yeah, it'd be, like I say, interesting to work out what that's going to look like. From Andrea Dingbat, I've just looked into an Ibogaine clinic and it's almost £14,000. I mean, that certainly would be like the upper tier. But yeah, I mean, I would say most of the Ibogaine clinics I've looked at, depending on how long you want to stay, they've all been in the kind of region of about £5,000, £5,000, £6,000, £7,000, for like a week stay. There's probably some that are cheaper than that as you get to the sort of like, ones which are less clinics and more retreats. So the difference there, the way I would split that is like clinic being where you have like clinicians and doctors and all that kind of stuff. Retreats being where it would be like, much more of either a traditional setting or a sort of, a not regulated sort of therapeutic setting. So this is not someone who's claiming they're a psychologist or a GP or doctor or anything like that. This would be almost like somebody like me giving somebody the medicine, sort of like what's happening, in like sort of Peru or Costa Rica or something like that. But yeah, certainly the ones where you want like the full clinical treatment, they're extremely expensive, prohibitively expensive, and that's part of my concern. Why when I'm sort of like being critical of this clinical model, we know how much it costs to do something like. To do like an alcohol detox at like sort of, one of these clinics for getting dry, one of these, they cost a fortune. I've even, because I looked into what it costs to get residential care for an eating disorder, because Rachel's got an eating disorder, and one of the things we looked into was like, can we get residential care? It's so expensive. It's prohibitively expensive. We couldn't afford it. You're talking, more than it would cost to go to like a high class hotel or something like that. So if that's the way that psychedelics go, if that's the way they become embedded in the culture, you will have to be like the ultra rich to get it. This is why your average person, your average working class person who's an alcoholic cannot afford to detox off alcohol, cannot afford to get dry. They just have to do it by their own bootstraps, or use some of the kind of free resources out there like Alcoholics Anonymous or something. Whereas like your celebrities, they can just check into like whatever it's like Betty Ford Clinic or something like that, and get dry. But it just can't, it's just not affordable, and I don't want to see psychedelics go down that same route. So when we see things like Ibogaine costing $14,000, I mean that's if that's what it ends up being, I would never be able to afford Ibogaine. That would be the end of that. So we need this middle ground, at least. I'm all for clinics existing for those who want it. I fully appreciate that not everybody wants to do stuff like going to the jungle or trusting themselves, trusting their psyche to some sort of, psychedelic facilitator, somebody like me, somebody like some, like a shaman or something like that. But something like that's going to have to exist, because otherwise nobody's ever going to be able to get their hands on these substances, or either that or it could just stay in the super underground. And that's the underground, the sort of like the black market situation. I don't think any of us want that, because that's kind of paints us as criminals. It means that there's some sort of the purity of the things that we're getting is questionable. So yeah, all sorts of kind of problems there. So Jeff Jeffington asks, how do you de-trip yourself? Like if you begin to get a bit too paranoid about stuff in general, about your body especially, how do you calm yourself down? That is it's actually a very good question, Jeff. How to answer this? How do you de-trip yourself? Well, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, there's a couple which are like fairly obvious. So, but I think there's one of the things worth like passing out here is like the intention. So, if your intention is to have a super awesome, fun time, and you start feeling yourself going under and getting paranoid, then the simplest thing is you need to change something up there. You need to change the music, maybe turn off the music. Maybe that's occupying your mind too much. I've certainly had that, whereby the music I was listening to was so powerful and so emotive that I couldn't tell that I wasn't the music. And I was so high, I was so like deep in the experience, and the music was so like bombastic that it kind of like that became my personality, and I didn't know who I was when the music wasn't on. So sometimes you need to actually just like turn music off, or at least change the music to something maybe a bit more ambient, and sort of maybe change the setting, like sort of get up and go into a different room, sort of just do something different, like go and get a bit of like fresh air or something like that. But so that's also kind of fairly typical advice on what to do if you start feeling yourself going under. But like I've talked about in a lot of my videos, there is situations whereby what many people would associate as a bad trip is actually the desired outcome. And so this really comes into play when you're doing something like sort of ayahuasca or any psychedelic, where you're looking to really sort of like do a deep dive into something that you want to work on, some sort of problem that you've identified within yourself, and you want to bring that problem to the surface to sort of like to process it. When that happens, it's more than likely going to be unpleasant. So a lot of the trips that I have, and again, it always sounds like somewhat like masochistic, but it's not unexpected that things start becoming paranoid or dark or unpleasant. That's the nature of what I'm trying to work on. So I tend not to think of these things as something necessarily to be avoided. There are definitely situations where you want to avoid, like if you've say you're at a some sort of music festival or something like that, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend taking psychedelics at a music festival. Say that you're there and you're looking for a really awesome time, and then suddenly you're just paranoid as fuck. Yeah, that's undesirable. You don't want to do that. My advice there would be don't take psychedelics at a music festival. But if you are sort of working on something, if you are in an ayahuasca ceremony and start like dark thoughts start coming up, that's probably part of the process. So I think, I wouldn't. I guess the thing there is, I don't think that every bad experience is necessarily an experience that's not worth happening, and I don't necessarily try and de-trip myself. I just try and accept whatever experience comes at me. Like just a couple of Sundays ago, I was tripping with Rachel. We did some LSD, and we were out by the lake near we live. We were sort of like put some picnic blankets down, where it was like a really nice day. And I realized that I was starting to have an ego death experience. We were outside, and just my sense of self had started dissolving. I did not know who or I could tell that I was losing the concept of who I was. Anyway, luckily at the moment that started happening, again, because we're outside and we're near a tree, this seagull just shat all over me, like bird shit just splattered all over my pants, and it kind of like it snapped me out of it enough to like, okay, I think we need to get back to the apartment because I'm falling out of existence here. So Rachel got me back to the apartment, and I kind of splattered down on the bed, and I just had a full ego death. And for some people that can be an extremely destabilizing experience. It can really freak you out. And to be honest, if I'd been in some other situation, if I'd been on my own, or particularly if I'd been somewhere like at a music festival or something, that would have freaked me the fuck out. But because I was, I knew where I was kind of like safe, and Rachel was there, and I just let this kind of happen, and it turned out to be an absolutely awesome experience. So I think I wouldn't necessarily go with this idea of like de-tripping yourself. Anyway, I think I waffled around that one a little bit. Let me just check on over here. So a lot of comments regarding yeah, society falling apart with this mental health crisis. Totally agree. I think this is one of the things they, talked a little bit earlier about the psychedelic renaissance. I think is a response to this this medical health crisis. Let's have a look. From Stefan, I'm terrible with names, Stefan, so apologies. Pavicevec. He's talking about how mushrooms hurt his stomach if he eats more than 14 grams. The fact that you eat 14 grams is goddamn amazing. You're a monster, Stefan. I mean, 14 grams is a lot. I'm assuming you mean like 14 grams dried there. I mean, I get the body load of mushrooms kicks in for me after about I tend to do mushrooms in like 5 grams, and I feel it, that 5 grams. So 14 grams, yeah, Jesus, that would be a lot. Let's see. So yeah, so comment from Stefan again, talking about comparison with psychedelic. To go deep into psychedelic experiences is kind of like there's an analogy there to like extreme sports, and I agree. What analogy that I've often used is like doing something which is extremely hard in order to get the benefit for it. So, the one I've often referenced is there is, undoubtedly like climbing like Mount Everest would be one of the hardest things, a human being could do. But it's worth climbing that mountain to get the view at the top. And that's how I sort of view like facing a lot of these sort of dark experiences. And, when people talk about bad trips and there's no such thing as a bad trip, I do, as much as I appreciate how much that phrase pisses people off, I do agree with it. I think that there's, bad trips, there's often some, learning experience in there. And the fact that it's, or if, that you're having a bad trip or that you're feeling paranoid, like that's coming from somewhere. It's coming from somewhere within you, because we know that paranoia, there's no paranoia in the LSD. There's no paranoia in the mushrooms. So that you're having some sort of an anxious response to it is something arising within you. So yeah, like the sort of extreme sports, they're tough, they're worth doing. And, if you commit to that experience, then you get the benefit of it. It's just like climbing Mount Everest. And I think, psychedelics are somewhat similar to that. So from M. Solomon, please don't talk about monstrous experiments to dogs. Dogs are the best thing in the world. Yeah, I mean, I apologize, mate. I didn't mean to upset anybody with the animal story. I totally agree. I think animal testing is absolutely horrific. But then I've got to sort of acknowledge that all of us here, probably everyone who's sort of watching this or commenting here, has benefited from animal testing. I'm probably going off the beaten track here of psychedelics, but I guess since psychedelics are now can be used within animal testing, then yeah. But yeah, we are the kind of recipients of this, so I don't think it's something we should stick our heads in the sand about. Doesn't mean we should condone it or be cool with it or something, but I was, although I also found these kind of stories distressing to hear, I'm glad my kind of like eyes are open to it, because I thought, oh God, yeah, this stuff's happening. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of, when I moved to Switzerland, and here in Switzerland, you don't really have you don't really have a homeless problem. It's very rare to see homeless people in Switzerland. And then when we took my family back to the UK, and had my daughter with me, she was like about 7 or 8 years old or something at the time, and suddenly there were just homeless people all around us, and she wasn't used to it, and she was like, what, why are all these people sleeping on the streets? Like, well, this is so sad. And I kind of realized how like desensitized I'd become, and how much I'd learned to ignore homeless people. And it took like this kid, my daughter, like pointing it out to me, that I was like, shit, yeah, this is like, this display of like human misery and suffering, and how people just ignoring it. It was, sometimes it just, you just need something to draw it home. And that's what this kind of, this dog story did. to me. It was like, oh shit, yeah, I need to, at the very least, just have that in my awareness that this is something that happens. So, but again, I keep going on about this fucking dog. I need to stop talking about it. So, I will just maybe as a light story, as a light animal related story. I used to, when I was living in England, I used to have peyote cactuses or cactuses, don't know. And I had this really big one, and it was like my pride and joy, this peyote cactus. And then one day I came home from work, and the cactus, and there was just dirt all over the floor, and the cactus was like just chomped up and full of bite marks and stuff. And my cat had got hold of the fucking cactus and was chewing the cactus, and the cat was absolutely off its tits. And the cat had eaten this fucking peyote cactus, and it was just fucking flying around there. It was just like bouncing off walls and stuff like that. It was, also don't give your cats drugs, but if you do, it's funny. So I'll leave it at that. Let's see. So there's an interesting comment here from Stair Cloakman, who's talking about ketamine is a dissociative, not psychedelic. So a lot of the people in this conference would disagree with you, Cloakman. So there was actually one of the slides that was put on here where they were talking about how sort of psychedelics would get categorized. So yeah, I mean, certainly ketamine has dissociative effects, but it's still classed as a sort of a psychedelic. And there was actually this kind of hierarchy of tier 1 psychedelics and tier 2 psychedelics, and the sort of the way that they get, the reasons why they're in those tiers. So the tier 1 stuff was your typical classic psychedelics like LSD, DMT, LSD. I think mescaline was in there as well. And then in the tier 2 was ketamine, DXM, some of the other sort of like researchy chems. I think like 5-MeO was in the first category. And basically the way they were separating it was that, first of all, the sort of the intricacy and the complexity of the visual experience, or the sort of the visionary experience, I should say, but also the way that they affect your thinking, the way they affect your sort of your consciousness. And with being like the tier 1 psychedelics, so like LSD and DMT, giving you feel very clear. You sort of have very clear, clean thoughts. You feel like you are present, and that's why one of the reasons why you get this kind of more realer than real experience, because you are like fully there for it. The tier 2 psychedelics like ketamine, you feel your thoughts feel clouded by experience. There is a certain, for want of a better word, like drunkenness that goes with these experiences. So you feel kind of like, disassociated. You feel sort of muggy in the head. But just the point is, like, scientifically they do class it as a psychedelic. But yeah, it was kind of interesting to see things pass out there. See, a couple of people got their hands up, so I'll just go further from the Discord. Let's go with Floppy Llamas first. So Floppy, you should have a thing there.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, mate. How you doing?
Hey, what's up, man?
Yeah, I'm good.
I don't know if you already, I haven't seen all your stuff, but do you ever think about talking to the guy from Vice? I forgot his name. He just goes around like to different parts of like the Amazon and all over the world, and he tries different psychedelics and stuff like that. I think his name is Morris.
Oh, Hamilton Morris you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever think about I think I'm not 100% positive, but I think he's trying to do something close to that the other guest you had, Josie, and look into like researching psychedelics, or even though you were talking about before, like doing, like if I did a huge dose of I used to do double dip LSD when I was younger, and doing it with friends in a large group outside at the park, sort of like riding our bikes, sort of made it, go by faster. So I can't imagine doing that like in in a hospital.
Especially with LSD, it's such a long experience, and that's actually one of the reasons why they prefer using psilocybin in these clinical settings, just because it's more manageable to have like a sort of a 4 to 6 hour experience to do it rather than like a sort of 6 to 8 hour experience. But to answer your question regarding Hamilton Morris, I mean, certainly I would love to speak to Hamilton Morris. He's not, I don't think he's particularly easy to get on as a guest. He doesn't make himself super available. I have exchanged a couple of messages with him. He actually commented on one of my videos. He messaged me on Facebook after one of my videos. So I've had a little bit of dialogue with him. But yeah, I think he's like quite a tough one to get hold of. But sure, I mean, I would love to speak to him. Maybe I just need to sort of, keep putting the feelers out to him. But I'm a fan of his work. I've watched his TV show. And yeah, I think he's now working with one of these sort of, I can't remember which one it is that he's working with. But yeah, he's working with one of these private psychedelic research companies.
Yeah, so I guess that is, but something like similar to what he's doing. But I guess it would be better than right now I'm taking some medicine for some nerve thing, and it's basically seizure medicine, but they give you that for nerve pain, I guess, because it's not going to go away. And I would much rather, my doctor says, oh, well, let me prescribe you, psilocybin. You might have to take it the first few times here I would much rather that in the future, but I live in New York, so I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But I see where it's all going towards. Not that I want to take huge trips in a enclosed setting like that, unless it's my apartment. But
yeah, I think it's a funny one. I think there needs to be a kind of like just this middle ground for it. So I could certainly understand it like with and maybe this is like a model for it to work. So your doctor maybe prescribes you something like psilocybin or LSD or whatever like that, and the first time you do it, maybe you do it in that sort of controlled environment because they want to monitor you, want to see how you react to it. You want to see if
that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, exactly.
But then there needs to be something in the middle, I think, somewhere like this is where I kind of use this phrase like like the psychedelic pub, something where it's not as controlled, but it's still not people.
Maybe like a test, maybe like not like necessarily a written test, but almost like how they do psych evaluations, almost like, well, it seems like on this dose he's okay in the setting, he's not going necessarily crazy, like throwing things at the walls, so we'll give him like micro doses, and then he can, what I mean, like scheduled, like I don't know if they could give you like a whole package of like 100 grams of mushrooms at once or something like that, but like a micro dose each week, and then you've got to come back and get your prescribed micro dose for the week or something like that.
Now microdosing is something different because there was a talk at this conference on microdosing, and for that particular trial, they did let people do it at home. So when
I say microdose, I mean like a couple grams. But
yes, you're probably talking. Yeah, I mean when they talk about microdosing in the sort of scientific sense, they're talking like 1/10 of what you would normally consider. So this would be like 10 mics of LSD, or like let's say like it would be like sort of 100 200 milligrams of
there's a great company in Amsterdam called Wholesalium, and they sort of sell truffles, and like anywhere within I think it's you could only get like a certain amount, like customs won't allow you, but truffles have this weird legal loophole to where, because they're not technically the mushroom, they're like the almost not the stem, but it's the it's like the beginning of legally you can. So I was looking through it and I was like, oh great, and I found the microdose, and it was kind of expensive, and I was like, why would I pay that much for like 1/10 of a gram of, and a gram of truffles is, because with truffles you can't take like 5 grams and have it be the same as dried mushrooms. You got to take like 10 or 15 for it to even be close. So I get it. Microdose is like almost the same as like a really strong Advil or something like that.
Mm-hmm. But yeah,
but it's.
I mean, that's one of the things I'd kind of where I'm kind of a little bit wary of where these things go, because I've seen like people selling microdosing kits, and they're kind of ridiculously overpriced, you know, for what is basically like these minimalistic doses. So I mean, yeah, I would kind of encourage anybody to sort of, if they wanted to go down that microdosing route, just do it yourself rather than, you know, buy a microdosing supply, like we should sort of pre-measure it for you. That just seems kind of I don't know.
You should just get a large amount and just microdose and just cut it up.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be honest, I kind of like advocate for being like completely psychedelic self-sufficient anyway. So if you're going to take mushrooms, grow your own mushrooms, you know, sort of extract your own DMT, grow your own sort of cacti, you know, I think do as much as possible to sort of make yourself self-sufficient. Also, it's just an interesting hobby, you know, as well. So it's
it's much easier to grow mushrooms now too. You can do instead of doing agar, you can do water. Mm-hmm. You can do like if I mean, it's kind of hard to get fresh mushrooms now. It's mostly dry, but if you can get your hands on fresh, you just, you know, split it open, cut into it, drop it in honey water, and then get a little magnet at the bottom to keep all the and spin it every few days, and I mean, they do it with like I've
never heard of that.
Special. They do it with like special machinery now, but that's right. That's the basis of it. And I tried it at home, and it's sort of successful, but you know, I have to continually try. But that's the new way that
interesting.
These like big corporations are doing it. Yeah, it's just honey water. You know, honey water with, you got to buy, it's like a special magnet that looks like a pill. And then sometimes you'll buy this, it's like an electronic machine that spins the water for you, like consistently. It's probably like $50. It's not that expensive, but.
Oh, it's like a magnetic stirrer sort of thing.
Yeah. Is that what it's called? It's like.
Yeah. You put magnet and it stirs it for you.
Yeah, so that's basically all it is. I mean, you got to keep it in a, whatever, clean environment and stuff like that. But it's gotten a lot easier than before. I know before it's like a real pain in the ass. Like,
but I think it's still, you know, it's a learning experience, and you know, I've been able to do it kind of successfully just in my kitchen. You know, as long as you do some sort of cleaning protocols and sort of, you know, wipe things down with some disinfectants. I don't you don't need necessarily like clean rooms and glove boxes, although they certainly help. But I've achieved it fairly easily just in a sort of in a well cleaned kitchen. So it's doable. I don't think you necessarily need all these kind of like specialist equipment for it. People have been doing it for years, you know, since the 60s. You know,
I mean, mushrooms are out there in nature growing in shit, and at home,
exactly.
Like, oh, you gotta clean this, and you gotta drop alcohol here, and oh my god, I dropped like a piece of lint. It's not gonna work out. Mm-hmm. But and before I go, you're right on the when I was doing acid one time, it was with, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 6 of my friends, and it, you know, it does last longer, but it does, at least in my opinion, when you're doing like larger doses. We did like for us it lasted like I think a day and a half. We didn't realize like they were double dip tabs, and we took like 5 or 6, and then ended up being like 10 or 12. But it's also, when I do psilocybin, I feel like even if I get sick, you know, I'll maybe go to the bathroom, or some people will puke or something. And then right after that, you know, you sort of feel okay, and the trip will just move on. But with LSD, your like stomach is turning pretty much for most of the trip. It's not, I mean, it kind of goes away, I guess, like a few hours in, but.
Oh, that's interesting. I never get that kind of, that to me is one of the better things about LSD. I never really get any sort of nausea from it. Whereas with
maybe it's just because we did so much. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, but to be honest, if you're tripping for a day and a half, it sounds like you did quite a lot. So.
Because we had one friend and he was there, and he, for some reason, like, you don't really get into a K-hole, but sometimes I guess some people on LSD will get into this like thought hole. Maybe I guess for him at least it was that. And he puked once, and once it started, it was like when you drink a beer and you got to keep peeing. Mm-hmm. He just wouldn't stop, so we just walked down the block. And once we walked down the block, and he had seen that we weren't leaving him, but he thought like, oh my God, they're leaving. He sort of left and it just stopped. I think that one space he was in, I don't know, he just couldn't stop. And
Yeah,
we were
sometimes
like,
just a change of scenery just snaps you out of it. Like, so, yeah.
Yeah, but he was, but for the beginning, he was just, I mean, we were just like, come on, man, just, which was funny because we were all tripping and we were just talking to him as if it was so easy for him to, we were like, come on, man, stop doing that.
Yeah, but when you're in it, you're in it. So yeah, you don't know what kind of experience that person's having. But yeah, I've got good.
We turned on what's it called, Panama by Van Halen, and blasted it, and then just started jogging down the block. And then once we did that, I think sort of partly the music and partly us just like walking forward sort of got him out of it.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff, mate. Good stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks a lot, Rob.
Yeah, you're
Appreciate
welcome. Good talking to you, dude.
Likewise.
Okay, I've got a few hands raised now, so I think the next person who was waiting was Hyperspace Holidays. So let's bring Hyperspace up. Hello.
How are you doing these days?
I'm doing good, mate. And you?
Not too bad. First of all, again, I want to thank you about talking about all that stuff. You're making it so accessible to everyday people. It's just great stuff.
I'm glad, mate. Yeah, I'm glad I'm able to sort of bring some of it back and talk about it, because it's it was such an interesting conference. I'm happy to share with it, and like I say, I think I need to do some more in-depth videos on it. But I'm glad you liked it, mate.
I'm just talking about in general, not just the.
Oh, right, cool. Well, thank you again.
I decided to follow your advice and actually go to the real stuff in Peru.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
So when was that?
It was back in April, and it was completely nuts. It was just nuts.
So did you go to one of the retreat centers then, or?
Yeah, I did go. I booked a trip with the retreat centers, but then the first day I was in Peru. I met a guy, and he was like, "I know a real shaman who's doing ceremonies for like the community and stuff. He doesn't do touristy things." And I went there, and it was just so I went there before I went to actual retreat, and it was just nuts. It was in a small community right next to the Sacsayhuaman ruins.
Yeah.
Cusco.
Yep.
And the way it started, basically, I thought you're just gonna go there, drink the ayahuasca, and see what happens. But no, we sat there and chewed on coca leaves for like 3 or 4 hours before we took any ayahuasca at all. So I was coked out of my mind before ever taking a sip of ayahuasca.
Yeah. I mean, it's very easy to underestimate just how potent those coca leaves are. Because it's everywhere when you're in the sacred valleys. It's like just coca leaves everywhere. Drink coca tea, and yeah, it's very easy to get overstimulated from it. But yeah, so you did that, and then you drank sort of. So you were next to the site of Sacsayhuaman when you drank the ayahuasca.
Yeah. Actually, they sold me on the idea that we're gonna be on the actual ruins, like there in the yard. But actually, it was pretty cold, so we were in a room. But yeah, we chewed on coca leaves for a few hours. Then we started drinking the ayahuasca, and when it first started for an hour, it was the first hour. It was just a regular DMT trip, and I'm thinking, I can do this at home. I don't need to be here. But after the second hour, I was like, no way I could be doing this anywhere else.
It was a positive experience for you then, Ewan?
Oh yeah, it was awesome. I highly recommend it to everybody. And again, I got inspired from you, from all of your travels.
Excellent. I mean the Sacred Valley is awesome. I love Cusco and just that area. I always prefer the jungle for ayahuasca experiences, but I have done some around the valley, and I like Cusco, Sacsayhuaman, that sort of area. Absolutely love it. So I'm glad you had a good time with it, mate.
Yeah, it was crazy. Then I went to the actual retreat. It was pretty touristic, I guess. You just go there, sit, and they give you the ayahuasca immediately. There was no work up to it. There was no ceremony or anything. But it was a really strong brew. The last evening, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna push it I'm just gonna go as deep as I can.
Well, you didn't go there for nothing. You know, that's you may as well while you're there see what it's all about.
Yeah, I did, but I always want to try if you can go a step further.
Mm-hmm.
And I was studying I literally had to argue with the shaman and the organizer there that I want to drink a full cup because they weren't giving anybody a full cup, and I wanted to just drink the damn cup. and the shaman was like, no, the brew is really strong. He's like, I'm gonna sing more songs if it's necessary, but just don't drink the whole cup.
Mm-hmm.
But I finally convinced them. Like I told them I want the whole cup. And just when it started, so this was the last night, so I already had 3 ceremonies by that time. I drank it, and for the first 2 hours, nothing. I literally felt nothing, and I was like, okay, it's probably not gonna be anything. The last day, I probably drank too much. No big deal. But after 2 hours, then it just started. I felt this burning in my stomach, like literally, like I had a metal piece in my stomach, and then I started throwing up. But when I was throwing up, I was seeing these metal pieces and like alien junk coming out of me. I was seeing it. Obviously it wasn't that, but that's what I was seeing.
Yes, it felt like, yeah,
and it literally didn't feel like it was coming out of my stomach like throwing up. It felt like it was getting synthesized from my body, all this dirt, and I was just spewing it out without even going through my throat. It was just going out. And then everything just went nuts. I literally probably went crazy for about 3 or 4 hours. I was just completely nuts.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what I tend to think these ceremonies are. It's like a kind of controlled or barely controlled insanity. You know, it's a chance just to sort of like release all the sort of inhibitions of your mind and all the structures, let it just sort of like fall apart, and then let it sort of reassemble itself into a sort of more, hopefully a more efficient and sort of like more, less damaged sort of form. But yeah, I mean, I've definitely had those feelings where like, okay, that was it. I am now nuts. I am now absolutely insane. Whatever Rob was, he ain't coming back. That's that's done. But you know what I mean? Then you sort of like you piece yourself back together. Like, oh, okay, there you go. And you kind of, it's a learning experience. But wow, yeah, I mean, that sounds like a very intense experience, mate.
Absolutely. And yeah, I haven't touched DMT since. So that's my big question to you. After you come back from Peru from a trip like this, when do you go back to DMT in your experience?
Yeah, just whenever it kind of calls me. I mean, I've had like a kind of a fairly weird relationship with DMT. I would say for probably like the past, 18 months or something like that, because I seem to go through these kind of like experiences of extremes. So, you might remember like a while ago, it was like, around about Christmas time last year, I put out a video about me doing 30 days of DMT. And then after I did that, I didn't go anywhere near DMT for a long time. I was like, oh, I'm done with DMT for a moment. And that was pretty much until I did this ayahuasca retreat in June, where I went and did 8 ayahuasca ceremonies, more or less like kind of like back to back. There was an odd day or two, or two in between. So then I did that, and then I didn't really, and then I've really just been sort of like dipping. I've recently just started like dipping back into DMT and stuff because I'm writing this book about DMT, and so I'm kind of like just kind of going back in there a bit. But yeah, I think I think it might be one of like the misconceptions that I'm like somebody who does DMT like every night or every week or something like that. That's not really the case. I tend to have these spikes of activity, and then I'll like, okay, that's enough for the moment, and I'll let that settle in. So yeah, I mean, I've done little bits of DMT here and there recently, but after a retreat, I would say it's usually like at least a couple of months. Sometimes, I would say like at least like 3 months really before I even think about doing something else. Just because I want to let that sort of that retreat like bed in, and I don't just want to like stack like crazy experience on top of crazy experience, because then you start losing your sort of grounding of where you are. So yeah, I normally give it like a good break after something like a retreat.
Yeah, I see. I did kind of on the retreat, I did kind of get all my questions answered, everything that I wanted to know about the world and DMT and all that, because I did ask the questions and everything was explained pretty in a pretty rough manner, but it was a really positive experience. But now I'm still missing all the images, all the crazy stuff you can see. So I'm kind of missing that, but I'm still kind of sketchy on if I should get back into it anytime soon.
I think it's just one of those. I know it's kind of a cliche phrase, but you know when you're ready, and don't. What I would say is like don't force it. If like the thought of doing DMT is giving you like crippling anxiety and stuff, then that's possibly telling you something. You know, it's so. What I tend to do is just listen to when my own sort of like curiosity is there, and I sort of. Every so often I get these feelings like I want to have an experience of the transcendent or the divine. I can feel when I want that, and I understand that this is going to evolve, this kind of like feeling of like letting go and going back into that state, and am I prepared to do that? And if you can sort of answer that question like in the code, like yes, okay, I feel like I'm ready, then do it. I'd never like really try and like, okay, I feel like I should do this, just force myself to do this because this is what it's like. No, I don't agree with that. I think there are sort of situations where you might not necessarily want to do something, and it would be good to sort of snap it out of you. But again, I think even then you sort of know when you want to do it. Like if you knew that you were suffering from really bad depression or something like that, and that you knew that like you needed to break this mindset, then that's a different thing. But when you come back from a trip, like I say, I think when the time is to dip back in. Just kind of like when you've say you've just been at the gym or something like that, you're aching and stuff. When the time is ready to sort of go back and lift some more weights. You don't necessarily just go like, oh, do it again tomorrow, because that's how you fuck yourself up. So yeah, I would just say just listen to your body, listen to your sort of mind, and just take it at your own pace, mate. There's if you don't do any DMT for like 6 months, the world doesn't end if you don't do it for a year. I mean, I've had years off sometimes in between some of the stuff, just because, and sometimes I focus on different substances. It doesn't necessarily have to be like DMT. So sometimes it's like, okay, DMT is like a lot. Like maybe I want something kind of like less visionary intense. So that's what I'll look at something like a mescaline or something which is kind of like an easier experience, say. But yeah, I don't be in a necessarily a rush to jump back on the DMT horse.
Yeah. For sure, there is this moment where you just know that now is the time to do it. But I kind of have it on the back of my mind that I'm kind of missing out on stuff, because life is only so long. So I don't want to be missing on all the DMT adventures. But the thing is, it's not just the imagery in the DMT world. It comes with a lot of mental stuff happening, and there's no way around it. You can end up in a pretty sketchy place.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. I give that time to sort of bed in, because yeah, I mean, I think one of the things with if you start treating these things like all they do is just give you fancy visuals, then you can be for a shock, because they can like really just change the way you think about things, and maybe you weren't, because you were so like, oh, I just want a good time. So then when it starts kind of rearranging your neural connections. It's like, shit, I didn't want that right now. So it's it's where the phrase just treat these things with respect, treat your body with respect, just listen out to it, listen to what's going on with you, and just don't be in a rush. It's it's not a competition, it's not a race. Just do, the whole point of these substances, I think, is to add benefit to your life. So if what's beneficial to your life right now is just to take it easy, then take it easy. It's absolutely fine.
Yeah, for sure. Great words. Also, another thing I wanted to tell you, the device you came up with about the cap on top of the e-mesh for easy reloading. That's great.
Oh, cool.
It's super practical. I can appreciate it because it's a huge struggle.
Well, it is. It was kind of a self. Like I got it just purely to make my own life easier. So yeah, I'm hoping it's. I'm hoping people find a lot of use in it. And it sort of saves a lot of frustration because that was one of the things I really like the e-mesh, but it does become just like a ball ache to use, which kind of almost puts you off using it. So hopefully this will balance that equation a little bit.
Yeah, the only thing I'd recommend, because I'm doing engineering and stuff, maybe you can just print a little bit more on top, like a wind guard, just around it. So if somebody's outside, you can just put it in, and the wind doesn't blow it out of the top, or something like that.
Interesting. Yeah, I okay. I mean, if we want to go down into the engineering, so yeah, I mean that's a good idea. The problem with that would be is that so they're 3D printed, and they're actually 3D printed like upside down, because you have to start I don't know how best to describe this. It would be hard to put the wind guard in, because then there'd be nothing to support the next layer as it comes in. I don't know if that makes sense. If you look, basically, if you're familiar with 3D printing, you have yeah. I don't know if I could explain this without sort of without talking nonsense, but let me have a ponder on it. It's a good idea. I think the wind guard thing's a good idea. I think,
or maybe it could be a separate piece that goes on.
Yeah, that just kind of occurred to me, like something that clips on top. So yeah, let me have a ponder and see what I can do with that.
All right, and maybe if you can somehow angle the top surface where the hole is, if it can be angled a little bit down to the hole, like a little bit of a funnel, so it's easier to.
So well, interesting. That's what it originally looked like, and I think if you watch one of my videos, you can see there's a prototype where it actually does look. I don't know if I've got the one here. But yeah, so originally it was made more like a funnel, so with very sloped sides to do it. And what we found, but that was actually detrimental. The reason being, what you're trying to do, if you think about what an e-mesh, what you're trying to do is basically have a layer of DMT compacted across the flat part of the mesh. So let's say you've got a flat mesh surface like this, and ideally you want an amount of DMT across the top there, as kind of like as flat and smooth as possible, because if it's heaped up, then that gives it sort of room to collapse and sort of fall off the sides again. Now, so if the objective is to compact the loose powder into a sort of like a cake, a solid shape, then what you need really is flat walls to be able to, so that you can put the stuff in and then compact it down and end up with a sort of almost like a rectangular pill which is sat on top of your mesh. If you've got sloped sides, you can't compact it down in the same way, because it'll just force it back up to the slope, and you don't. So the slope actually doesn't serve any purpose in regards to that goal of compacting it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I see. Maybe you could just make the top thicker, so you still get the compacting, the thickness to compact it, but you still get the incline. But just an idea. Yeah,
could do. But again, what we found is that it's actually fine, because basically you've just got a sort of a fairly big hole you can aim for, and I found it works fine. I mean, maybe I'll do some playing around with it, but yeah, there's possibly something I could do, make it thicker and add an incline. We'll see. Maybe I'll do a few more prototypes, but I'd say for the moment, this is probably like the final design, because you wouldn't believe the amount of prototypes. Even just to come up with something this simple was a lot of prototyping. So I think for the moment, I'm just going to let that one be that. Maybe there'll be a version 2 at some point in the future.
Oh, for sure. These are just more minor improvements. It still improves the device a lot. Yeah,
it does, man. And I hope you find it useful if you get yourself on.
Oh, for sure. I'm not a big fan of the e-mesh. I've tried it. It does work. It's really efficient, but I just keep going back to the dab rig. I just don't know why. It just works better for me. But
yeah, I mean, whatever. I mean, I think that's the thing with any of these things, and it's why I kind of I say in one of my videos, like if I would like recommend people like use like glass pipes if that's what they're used to, and especially it's like a low barrier to entry. I think there's like almost like an over obsession with like spending a lot of money on different bits of technology. If you've got something that works, just use that. It's absolutely fine. I mean, the point is getting there. It's not necessarily how you get there. There's no difference in the overall experience. So, if I smoke DMT through a glass pipe, it's still pretty much the same experience as smoking it through an e-mesh. It's just e-mesh is just quicker and easier, really, in my opinion.
For sure, yeah. It's very practical. Also, if you're traveling, if you want to try it outside, anything like that.
Yeah. So, anyway, I think I'm going to have to. Time's ticking on it, so I'm going to have to move on to some of the other calls. But
for sure. Great talking to you. Have a great evening. I'm going to keep listening.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
Bye.
So I think Dambrass was the next one who had his hand up. I just saw a quick question actually. I think I might answer. Have I lost it? Don't know. Maybe I'll have a look for it later. Let's see what Damras has got to say. So move to. Yeah. So Damras, you should have an invite thing now. There you go, mate.
Hey Rob, how's it going?
Yeah, it's good, mate. And you?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure, mate.
I had a question because I was really interested in everything you had to say about the Alps conference. I was wondering if, where do you see the psychedelic culture going after decriminalization and global legalization? Do you see, like you said, working class psychonauts basically having maybe having to kind of take matters into their own hands because psychedelics become kind of industrialized in a way because of the whole big psychedelics thing people are sort of worried about? Do you see people just kind of going back and doing like Sangha circles again, or even like people making their own ayahuasca and facilitating their own ceremonies, kind of like a new neo-shamanism or like an uptick in neo-shamanism? Do you see that as a possibility? Would you be against it? And do you think the people at the Alps conference, the kind of clinical side of it, would push back against something like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, mate. I think, well, okay, so a couple of levels to it. I think the kind of the level of home use, kind of like what what most of us are used to, the fact that we use like psychedelics in our own home and stuff like that part's not going away. I think that's I don't think there's a way by which it can go away. I think the more like decriminalized things get, then the easier that becomes. So I think that part's fine. And I think this is one thing when there's a lot of outcry against these like private psychedelic organizations who would, and like the sort of the criticism is like, oh, they're trying to patent this or trying to patent that. That whatever they do is not really going to have much of effect on the average person's use. I think that part is because it happens underground anyway. It could always continue happening underground, I think, but it looks like it's going to become easier in a sort of legal way. So that part's fine. The bit which I'm kind of concerned about is first of all is that kind of idea of clinical psychedelics becomes like normalized as though that's the only respectable way to do it, and that if you want to sort of facilitate psychedelics in some kind of like groups sort of setting, that you would need to be a clinician or you would need to be a therapist or something like this then becomes that psychedelics become a tool of the kind of like the medical establishment and not available to sort of to anyone else. So this is why when to anyone else within that same space. So what I mean is like the ability for, say, someone like myself or some other kind of facilitator to be able to open their own center somewhere in Europe and have this kind of somewhere in the middle where it's not the full clinical thing. It's not necessarily trying to be a traditional thing. It's actually, you could call it neo-shamanism or sort of psychedelic circles or something like that. But what I want to see is that being allowed within the culture rather than having to be some sort of covert thing under the radar. And this is why I constantly refer to South America, because that's what they've got. They've got the ability to have psychedelic communities, psychedelic churches. It can happen out there in the public space, and I think that's where we need to get to in Europe, and certainly in the US as well. So yeah, that's the bit which kind of does worry me about these psychedelic organizations, is that they're going to own that space and not leave room for, let's say, community practitioners. So that really that the kind of divide will be that it will be psychedelics at home, possibly illegally, possibly legally, depending on where you live. And then there'll be this clinical privatized route, and that there's just nowhere for the community sort of psycho-spiritual aspect that I'm talking about. So basically, we're talking about like something as if like, like I referred earlier to Alex Gray's sort of psychedelic church kind of thing. Like if I think that should be an option on the table. And I don't think Alex Gray should have to be a therapist or a nurse. I think if he had a therapist or a nurse on staff, awesome, even better. But I don't think that should be necessary. Like I don't think we should start having to say, oh well, for every psychedelic community, I'll just use church for ease of use. But I'm not necessarily going in the religious side of things. That there needs to be a therapist, and there needs to be this, and there needs to be all these safety protocols. Because then then we could say, well, what does that mean then for what's happening in South America? They certainly don't conform to Western, ideas of what is safe. So are we saying that the Western stuff is better than them? Like what is wrong with Western sort of culture that we need everything to be nerfed? And again, so this is not to say that the clinical nerfed safe space setting shouldn't exist. I just think there needs to be that society needs to allow for something in the middle. So that's where I'm really interested. I'm interested in that bit of how society can mature into a model, something like, like the Mexican sort of like peyote churches, something like the sort of South American ayahuasca sort of, centers. What's the Western equivalent without it being instantly something that happens in a hospital? So
right, I feel that people really push back against. Also, well said. I agree with everything you said. I think people really push back against people in the West doing that sort of thing, taking cues from what they do in South America and putting art into it, or poetry or performance or meditation or anything like that. I think they push back against it because I do see pushback against Alex Gray's thing called NTM, because people, I guess, in the West see it as a bit culty when people try to take psychedelics and do community, and they sort of label it. And I worry about this kind of like privatization of psychedelics, where it will only be the clinical method, and if it's not that, then it will be pushed into the underground or labeled the underground or considered something not official, not allowed, or whatever it might be. And I think we have to find that middle ground where we take the cues from what they have been doing in South America for thousands of years, applying our own things to it, and letting it be people who are like yourself, who are qualified, who are experienced, who know what they're doing, but aren't licensed therapists that got a degree for 8 to 10 years or whatever the case might be, because that's going to be the large majority of psychonauts that are going to be healing with this stuff. Most of us are not going to be able to afford the therapy. The people who really need it will hopefully be able to get it, but the large majority of it for the next 10 years won't be able to acquire.
Yeah, I mean, this was actually a point that was raised at this conference, and so it just shows that what a kind of a mismatch there is between what people are saying and what's happening and where people's minds are. So the phrase is being used there. We are in a mental health crisis. There are people desperate for help with their mental stability. And so we're acknowledging that, like governments are acknowledging that. But then on the same breath, we're saying in order to treat that, then we are going to require specialized clinics staffed by people who have a minimum of 6 years of degree-based psychotherapy, psychotherapeutic background. And then on top of that, they're going to have to then go and, do some side studies in psychedelic facilitation. And then we're going to have to build these centers, which are going to be, can only deal with one person at a time. So one person is in a room with 2 staff monitoring them. These 2 staff have had like 6 years. That just cannot scale. So if that's the model, that model does not fit the term of mental health crisis. There's got to be a more community-based model, and that's, I mean, this is something that basically, this is where I see my long-term future. In that, myself and Rachel, we're talking about buying some property, setting up like a kind of retreat center somewhere in sort of Europe, but somewhere where it can be more of an open model, where it's not necessarily about people spending thousands to come and stay for something like how can we build this out into an actual community, and something, through using things like the online presence that I've sort of built up, something where there is a feeling of it carrying over past the actual physical attendance. And again, this is where Alex Gray, I think, is a really good model for this, because he's got a very big online presence, but he's very it's accessible physically. You can go to his place and sit with him in these ceremonies. So that's what I'm trying to get to, and the choice of where that is able to happen is going to be based upon like the legality of things, and where it seems to be allowable. And at the moment, that's from the European side of things, that looks looking like someone like Spain or Portugal. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of where one of my kind of big things this year is like, where do I see myself fitting into this picture? Like, where does this channel that I've created, this sort of community that I've created, like what am I going to do with it? Does it just carry on as a YouTube channel, or do I try and do something with it to actually put my money where my mouth is in terms of there being a psychedelic community? And I think that, this is something I've not been comfortable with for a long time, but when I'm at these conferences and I'm hearing these things, and I'm thinking, shit, there's a gap here. There's a gap for people like me. When I say like people like me as a, as on the other end, like where can I go? I don't want to go to a clinic. Where can I go? I can't always afford to go to South America. Where do I go? Who's going to provide a place for me, so that we can have the kind of like integration practices and have the sort of like settings that I think is so necessary and is so like sort of underdeveloped within psychology. And I kind of came to the conclusion, if no one else is going to provide it, then maybe this is where I need to step up. I need to fucking grow. It's maybe this is my maybe this is the evolution of this community. Yeah, maybe. And so I think that's kind of where I'm kind of going with it. I think, if I don't try and do something, then nothing will happen, and it will just end up by default becoming this clinical space.
Yeah, and I think it's very important, like for people like yourself and for really all psychonauts, to take into account where their particular place is in the psychedelic renaissance and in the movement, because I think every single person matters. People who are listening to this who take psychedelics, figure out what it is that you would like to contribute. And through that, we can kind of build community. You have people like Rob who are doing such great things as far as bringing us together. And I think it would benefit everybody if, people who write, people who make art, people who make videos or edit videos or whatever the case may be, contribute to the cause. And then hopefully, 10, 15 years from now, or hopefully much shorter than that, we can all be sitting down in person at a thing like what you just described, a community center or a healing, whatever word we would use for it.
Yeah, I just want to add in there that I don't even necessarily think it's it requires like people of some kind of talent, because I think that the important part of a community is the community. It's like the important part of a church is the congregation, and I think that's the bit that I think is missing from what we call the psychedelic community. Like it really is the chance for us to practice as a community, to come together. We just don't have spaces like Christianity has churches. We just don't have, we've not been able to advertise meeting spots. It's all happened a bit completely. That seems to be changing, and I think we should leverage that change. And I think this is the time now where we need to start practicing that sort of that westernized psycho-spiritual sort of integration and developing it into what we want it to be. And part of that will be showing up. Just showing up and being part of these groups. So, and that's why I'm kind of interested in being able to provide a space for that to happen. Like my kind of, I might be being like some kind of hippie here, but like my idea is like, if I can, buy some land and build like a Maloka and build a space, and I'll say, look, on these days I'll be doing stuff, and you're welcome to join me. And you can come in, you can pay whatever it costs to join in, but it's not. I'm not looking to, fleece anybody, but just so that there is a point of where it's like, okay, I can be there. And just like when I go on retreat, like I only need to go on retreat like once a year to scratch that itch, say, and maybe not once a year, maybe once every 2 years or 3 years, but just to know that there's a place and there's a community, or you can get on, you can have a Zoom call, you can, it makes the difference, I think, which is where the psychedelic community is just, there's a void there at the moment, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a complete lack of, I guess, resources for people to talk the experiences through, and the content of the experiences is very important to talk through. And I can't imagine for psychonauts who are trying to figure it out themselves, who haven't found the online aspect. And it's scarce. It's very unfortunate, but I definitely see it growing, and I definitely see you contributing to that.
Well, I hope so, mate. Yeah,
we're all very appreciative for that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, sorry, go ahead.
No, I had one more question about the Alps conference. I wanted to know what the most far out thing that you saw said there was, because I'm just curious where the clinical aspect of psychedelics stands on, the other side, I guess, is how people see it, between scientific rationalism and mysticism, or whatever you want to call it. What was like the strangest or most far out or most open-minded thing you heard at the Alps conference?
I think the most open-minded, or certainly the stuff that resonated most with me was the stuff from Sam Gandhi, and like I say, he's going to be a guest on the show, so I'm really looking forward to him. He was really talking about. And I think this is probably one of the things that jumped out. He was talking about like how much the nature experience is kind of like something that's integral to us as human beings, and how that gets stripped out in these kind of clinical settings. I think the thing that the kind of the counterpoint to that was, and again, I don't want to seem like I'm wailing on these guys who are doing this research. I'm so glad that they're doing this research. I think it's really important, but they are so blinkered. They are so like tunnel vision, and to be honest, that's probably how they should be. I think researchers should be tunnel vision. They're doing researching something very specific, but the kind of the problem is, and you see that figures like this can very easily become like superstars, like Rick Strassman, right? Yeah, Rick Strassman,
psychedelic celebrities.
Yeah. No, I think Rick Strassman is like, he has my respect for what he did regarding DMT. But to be honest, he's not the best spokesperson for psychedelics. He's just not. He's just he became this fucking superstar from it, and. Certainly when I see a lot of these kind of researchers, and they sort of talk, they strip everything down to very simple
scientific terms.
Scientific terms, just very basic sort of understandings of stuff. Like they don't really seem to have much grasp of that. There's like a cacophony of things going on here. And so again, this idea that that's the only representation of psychedelics and psychonautics and stuff, that kind of gives me a bit of the fear. And that's why I think, yeah, it's more prominent sort of things do need to sort of appear. I mean, one sort of classic example with this of like how there's sort of like the Americanized, westernized view of this kind of like neo-shamanism went down on it. And it's one of the reasons why I spoke up for him, which I don't know if you guys are familiar, but if any of you guys saw the whole thing that was going on between like Symposia and Martin Ball, and here you had like, basically people really wailing on a sort of a homemade psychedelic facilitator, because some of the stuff he's doing, it seemed like, it seemed weird and outlandish, and they were saying like, well, where's your medical training? You've got no medical training. You're not a therapist. Why are you giving that? And it's like, yeah, like he's not claiming to be those things. He's claiming to be this thing in the middle.
Yeah, psychedelic facilitator, right? And we need to leave room for people like that. Even if we think, if they think Martin is weird, it doesn't mean he's bad and shouldn't be allowed to do something.
Yeah. And if somebody's aware of what's on the table and they want that, then I'm like, yeah, that's up to them. That's their sort of right to go and have weird stuff happening.
Whatever they want to, right?
Yeah, but I think we've really got to desensitize ourselves to this idea that like there has to be medically trained psychotherapists or else this is abuse or dangerous.
We're going to end up in a bad spot if we only allow these certain people to work with psychedelics. We're going to completely miss the point, and then we'll have shit the bed on the whole psychedelic renaissance thing. But I have hope.
I have hope too, and I think these guys play a part in it. But I don't. Right. I think my thing is they are nowhere near the full story, and I don't know if they know that. Maybe I'm being sort of unkind to them to think that is what they think. Maybe they just, these are guys just completely caught up in their research. But you do have to be kind of like a fairly focused, driven person to do this. But my concern is that I think they're missing the point around like the human experience around psychedelics, just stripping them down into visionary aspects and trying to categorize mystical experiences. It doesn't. It misses something, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the writer Eric Davis, I don't know if you're familiar with him, he strikes a good middle ground between the two. He wrote a book about Terence McKenna and Philip K. Dick and Robert Anton Wilson, and the commonalities between these three figures in the 1970s California psychedelic landscape. And he has talked at Burning Man a lot about how we need to acknowledge both, the things that maps are doing and why that's good, but we can't lose the creative spark and like you said, the human aspect of it, and how those are really the things that will probably aid us in healing and aid the general public in healing, is those emotional aspects that are brought on by things like connection to nature. Those are things that heal naturally, and that's why the South American method is so effective. So yeah, like you said, I think we'll need to take something from their book and add it to our own, and like you said, de-Americanize neo-shamanism in a way to make something new.
Yeah, that's it. It shouldn't just be an import of South American traditions. We need to come up with our own sort of thing. And it's interesting you mentioned Burning Man there, because I think Burning Man's like something we should look to as a kind of an influence of, it is this kind of like a spiritual migration. There is this spiritual element to something like Burning Man, and it is a very westernized thing. That's it's uniquely Western, I would say, Burning Man. In fact, people criticize it for being overly westernized and overly white and stuff like that. But I think there's something we can look at there, is like what something makes these people go out into this sort of condition and take part in this kind of mega event. And it's hard to argue that it's just simply because it's like a festival. There's something there that's being tapped into, some kind of need to be part of this kind of temporary community. And there is this spiritual element of this, the burning of the man and the sort of the temple and all this stuff. And I think that's something we should look into. Like what is this, European psychedelic culture? Maybe part of it looks something a bit like what goes on in Burning Man, like this kind of, welcoming of strangers, like sort of reciprocal sort of giving, sort of, something there. Or, again, I'd really need to unpack what all the components of it, but
we're brought together by art and by community, and there's obviously psychedelics there, but like you said, that I think the events in the future will look at least a little bit like Burning Man. There'll likely be art there. I imagine they'll look a lot like what Alex Gray and Allison Gray are doing.
I think so.
Because they do have the spiritual aspect, they have the art, they have the healing. I think it'll just once the laws change, psychedelics will hopefully become the centerpiece, like they will be allowed to be. And Burning Man will probably be a critical kind of clue as to what brings people out into deserted areas with large art installations and like-minded people.
Well, I see it kind of like as like the equivalent would be like, say, I think like one of the models I've explored with this would be something similar to like Hell's Angels or sort of motorcycle gangs, in which you have chapters. So rather than having like trying to centralize things under like one kind of like church or something like that you would have an organization which is it's separated into like autonomous chapters, all following like a similar kind of practice, like a motorcycle gang follows similar practice. They wear the leather jackets, they drive certain brands of bikes and stuff like that, they congregate in certain places. And so this kind of like chapter model, but yet with something that brings you all together, like say like once a year, like for a mega event, in motorcycle gang terminology, they have these big motorcycle rallies, but like something like Burning Man, so you've got all these kind of like psychedelic chapters like Entheon, where they're operating on a small local scale, but there's a lot of them. And they're all operating off more or less the same kind of like guidelines or guidebook or something like that. But then there's this kind of mega event that might happen like once a year or something like that, where you just all come together and it's like, and that's your kind of like Burning Man-essing. Maybe that's what it looks like.
Yeah, it's almost like we're re-psychedelicizing, because I feel like a lot of this stuff did go on in the 90s. I've heard McKenna talk a lot about events they would do where he would speak and they would have electronic artists come and they would play psychedelic music, and he would there's one recording called I think it's called Time Wave Zero, where it's Terrence just rapping over a guy doing psychedelic visuals and music. And I imagine it sort of being something like that, but there is medicine involved, and it's more, I guess it would look different in the sense that it would be less underground, and it would be more, society would not see it as like these people who are in the woods doing drugs. It would be more like these are events based around art and healing. And so I definitely look forward to that, and I'm sure you'll be a part of it, and I'm glad that we're all here to be a part of it.
Likewise.
And I also do appreciate Maps' place in the whole thing. I know people
for sure
do worry about them trying to I guess be the sole proprietor of MDMA and things like that, but I think they'll stand the test of time, and we'll see their contributions were valuable. But like you said, they can't be the only ones who are facilitating this type of thing.
To be honest, I've got a very, very positive view of Maps. I think these are more like some of the good guys, and I've seen they've got a lot of shit, and I think they're navigating a very sort of tricky space. And the impression I've got from Maps is not necessarily that they want to be the sort of the sole owners of it. I just think they just want to get it out there. They just want to get push it through the system. So I've got a very high opinion of Max, and Rick Doblin was one of the speakers actually at this conference. Was that he was there remotely, he wasn't there in person. But I would consider myself a supporter of Maps, and they're not perfect, but I don't think they're bad guys at all. I think they're I think these like one of the ally organisations, and I hope they sort of succeed in what they're doing with it, especially with with MDMA and whatever else they look at.
Yeah, I think, there's psychonauts there, and that's what matters. I think people should stop expecting us to have perfect organizations moving this thing forward. I think that you know, but yeah, Rob, it was great talking to you. Great conversation.
Yeah,
always.
likewise, mate.
All right, have a good one. I can't wait for the next video.
Hi, dudes. Bye.
Later.
Okay, so I think I'll do like one last call I could do, and I think that's going to be, yeah, Nando. So Nando, you should have a little button saying come up and speak. There you go. Yeah, man, Nando. If you are, we can't hear you. Okay, I'll just have a quick look at the questions, the text questions, while you see if you can still see what's going on with your mic situation. So, a lot of comments coming in there. I'll just do one, which seems like it's a bit of a big one, but I'll try and do it. So, John Smith asks, oh, where's it gone? It's just pinged off. Where's that question gone? It looked like it was a good one. Share. These questions, it's really hard to scroll through these comments. Okay, there we go. From John Smith, do you believe that our individual consciousness continues on after death and we move on to another plane of experience? And if so, is this based on your experiences with DMT? Yeah, I would say yes and yes. So, yeah, I've definitely had that experience on DMT. That was kind of like informed me. You know, again, within the experience, I'm not saying this is true, but this is what was informed me within the experience, was that, you know, this kind of like human experience is like, you know, you could think of this as like that there was something before this. We were part of like some kind of universal consciousness before this, and we kind of broke off from that to inhabit matter and understand matter and have this human experience, and that afterwards we will rejoin that sort of collective and upload the information that we have gathered from this experience, and sort of like by doing so, that is how we will evolve consciousness itself. That's how the universe will evolve from us having these kind of experiences. I do kind of, you know, I mean, I had that experience. I cannot unhave it. I believe that to be the case. So, you know, you could compare that to being like a sort of like a chrysalis style situation, that this is, you know, we are going through this experience now. We will go through a transitionary experience, which is death. And then, yeah, I do think consciousness carries on. I don't think Rob will carry on. I don't think Rob exists beyond this human form. But I think that the conscious awareness that is now currently calling itself Rob and doing this YouTube shit, I believe that awareness, that sort of pure consciousness is, I think that will carry on in some shape or form. So yeah, mate, I hope that answers your question. Let's just go back and see. Nando, I don't think whatever's happening with your mic, it doesn't seem to be working, mate. So I guess on that note, let me just have a quick nosy through and see if there's any other questions answered. From Orb, curious if you've ever seen any motifs of hyper-technological nature during your vape, DMT, or ayahuasca trips, as in plants, trees, or hallucinations relating nature and technology. Yes, mate. I mean, I think one of the features of my DMT or ayahuasca trips is that I've often referred to them as spiritual technology, because I think what is technology and what is nature and what is like biology and what is science and what is whatever just completely collapses, and you just end up with this one beautiful thing of yeah, I mean it's inseparable. I think, you know, I have psychedelic experiences where I am, you know, people talk about like entities and stuff like that. Yeah, you know, these could be these entities are nature, in my opinion. Like these entities, they could be, you know, I've had communion with like trees and fungi, you know, with this experience, but they've not been like little mushrooms or trees. They've been conscious systems like me. You know, when you're in these psychedelic, these DMT experience, you're surrounded by conscious entities, and you know, what do I look like to them? Do I look like Rob, or do I look like another one of these glowing light figures? In fact, I've got a chapter in my book. I'm writing it at the moment about detailing one of these experiences, whereby I think that the psychedelic experience, that what's happening here is more or less like a universal chat room. Like if you think of an internet chat room, but think about that for consciousness, all consciousness, like the consciousness of plants, the consciousness of ants, the consciousness of dolphins, the consciousness of human beings, the consciousness of aliens. You know, if you think about this in terms of a problem, if the problem is that, you know, consciousness strives to connect with other consciousness, but it's almost impossible for us to connect with a spider in our backyard, you know, or a blade of grass. So how are we going to connect with aliens, or, you know, even if we're talking like physical aliens? What about if we're talking about sentient gas cloud aliens? What if we're talking about hyperdimensional aliens? How would the universe solve this problem of consciousness wanting to interact with each other? And I think perhaps one of the solutions to this problem is that you have something like what's called like the DMT realm, whereby you can have an interdimensional chat room for conscious systems, for trees and bees and aliens and, you know, gas aliens or whatever, to interact with each other in a place whereby all that matters is consciousness. That's the only thing. If you are consciousness, you can enter this place. And the way to deliver this place to biological systems like ourselves is in this chemical package of something like DMT. So yeah, mate, like I said, I'm gonna flesh this out a lot more in the book that I'm writing. A bit of a shameless plug there. So yeah, I mean, I think like you can almost carry that, extrapolate that on into, you know. So I've talked about biological systems. I've talked about like you know, animal-based systems. What about like AI consciousness? This would be another conscious system. Look, if technology does birth consciousness at some point, then that would also have access to the same place, you know. So that's why I think there is a feel within these DMT experiences of there is a technical feel to them. Sometimes you feel like you're interacting with hyper intelligent robots. Maybe you are, you know, I don't know, you know, it's very interesting. But I think at that point we can sort of see that, like, or at least my viewpoint, that technology is nature. You know, we are nature. People keep talking about like humans being against it. Like, no, we are nature. This is what we do. Just like, you know, termites build termites mounds. We build houses and factories, and, you know, beavers build dams, and sometimes they destroy the environment as well. You know, but we're all part of nature, and so technology, I think, is part of nature. So yeah, I think all these things blend together within that space. So hopefully that answers your question, mate. Okay, I've been going on for a while now, and I'm probably gonna have to wrap this one up because I got work in the morning and stuff. But I just want to say thank you a lot to everyone who's asked a question and who's been come on for a chat. I'll just remind you again that I'm giving away a couple of these Easy Mesh Easy Loaders. Just write a comment saying I want one, and I will do some sort of like raffle draw, and I will contact you. I'll reply to your message and let you know if you're a winner, and then you'll have to email me and send me the what's it called? Address? Yeah, your address. I feel like I'm struggling with words today. Anyway, that's all for now. I will say thank you very much, and I'll catch you guys next.